Hi folks, Baldguy here with another installment in videos of things that you can do around the house to save money and learn to be productive. One of the hobbies that I've gotten into is I make knife handles. I do not forge knives, so I buy the metal blank. I can reshape them, I can grind them down, but some of the things I've done, I got friends who hunt. I got some pieces of stag. I buy a $12 knife and I put a stag handle on it. Or I buy a $12 knife blank and I get some nice wood, and the white that you see there is actually a piece of stag. None of these are perfect, but I'm learning as I go. So they're valuable to me, not for the money that they're worth, but for seeing the progress that I'm making. But if you're going to have a knife around, you're going to need a sheath. Now, I just so happen to have a brother who is a fine leather worker. He spent years in the saddle industry, and now in his retirement, he makes things like this. You can even see his nice little stamp there. So there's a knife that I made, and he made a great little holster from an idea that I had. These two loops go in the small of your back, so the holster fits behind you. But, and I love my brother, but I can't afford to pay him to build me a handmade leather sheath for every knife that I've made, because I've literally made a couple of dozen knives now. But I've also got things that, not things I made. Here's a utility knife that's very old. It's a piece of almost like a billet steel that you sharpen down, and then you remove the Allen, the set screw there, and you can slide this thing out. It's really handy when you're on the tractor and you need something that's very thick. So I made a little sheath with a belt loop in it. Made it myself. The very first one I made, which is, by the way, the ugliest one, trying to see if I could figure out how to sew things. So I made one for my utility knife here. The blue tape you see is simply a gauge for me to know how deep to make it. But what I was learning to do is to wet the leather and to shape it. But this is, this is really thick leather. It's really hard to shape down to a fine bend. So for this particular knife, I got some scrap leather, and you'll notice this is a shaped piece of leather, but I didn't have any leather that was this thin, and this thing really works well. I don't have equipment. So let's say you want to get into some of this stuff without an investment. Can you afford an X-Acto knife? If you can afford that, and if you've got some scrap lumber laying around the house anywhere, you can start doing this. So today I want to show you a source of leather. Now, I get this scrap leather from my brother because they have a lot where he used to work. They have a lot of scrap leather. There's a lot of sources for that, but I'm able to get it free. But you see these? If you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I am also a woodcutter. So I use a lot of gloves, and this is what happens. I start having gloves with holes in them, and I don't like splinters. So I've already started with the other one. This leather is very thin, very supple. I start with an X-Acto knife, and I just find the seams along this, and I split it out until I have an open piece of leather. And if you take a knife and you lay it across here, I have a nice piece of leather before I get into the fingers that is plenty big enough for me to form it. So I just split the leather, split all the seams, and get the largest pieces available I have out. Now, I took the knife you saw a moment ago. I simply laid it down and drew a pattern, and went over here to you can use a jigsaw. If you have a Walmart jigsaw, this will work. I took it over there and just cut this out, and then I went through it with some sandpaper to widen the gap. And I've already done this one, but I took a flat piece of leather. What you do is soak your leather. Now, when I say so, thin leather, I can soak it for a minute, and that's plenty wet. Thicker leather, I might soak for maybe 5 minutes. And then I simply lay my leather right on my form, and I take the part I cut out and slide it in there, and I push it down, and what I do is then clamp it down. I put something over here to hold it, and what I end up with On this side, I've got a nice flange, which I'll glue. And on this side, I get a perfectly formed piece of leather. So the last thing I do, I get my thick leather out. I just threw it on the ground, hold on. I get my thick leather out, orient it the way I want it, and just glue this down. Gorilla Glue. So for the price of a $5 tube of Gorilla Glue, which I get this stuff, this is probably $7. This is the construction adhesive. This is white, and it leaves a white bead on it. And they also make a Gorilla Glue that is clear. So here's a knife, no sewing. I didn't have any needles to buy. I took a piece of leather. I've got my thin formed leather on top, my backing piece of leather, and then I went here and I glued a loop into it, and I glued it here, and I glued it here. And each time I glue it, I clamp it and let it set for just a few hours. Gorilla Glue sets pretty well in 24 hours, but it'll set well enough to hold in just 2 or 3 hours. So I just clamp this thing down, and you can actually sew this. Then you can take your shoe polish kit and you can color it any way you want. So this is not going to be something that I can show. It's not going to be something that I can sell. I didn't make it for that. I made it for a nice belt loop that I did myself. And I am as proud of it as any sheath that I've ever bought, simply because I was able to do it. This is my, I made a couple of these utility sheaths, literally not for looks, but just say, okay, I need to start learning. There are plenty of techniques that you can find videos for, but now I'm making them for a more utilitarian purpose. When I want to carry a knife, sometimes you go hunting, you need a skinning knife. I have one available. I don't have to spend $30, $40, $50, $60, $70 on a custom-made sheath. By the way, if you need custom-made sheaths, reach out to me. I'll get you in contact with my brother, and he'll make you a really nice one. I've got another one here. Look at that. I mean, absolutely fantastic. The work is just really good quality work. The sewing, you'll even notice, looking here along through here, there's 2 pieces of leather joined, and you can't tell until you get back here that it's actually 2 pieces that is joined together. Really nice work. So he's made guitar straps and a lot of other things. But just learning to form a piece to fit something exactly, and then I'll put it on my heavier leather for the backing, glue it, and I'll clamp the edges down and let it set for a few hours. Then I'm going to cut my back strap here. And because this is really thick, I could just bend the back strap over, but this piece of leather is not that long. So I'll get some more scrap, and I'll glue me a piece that will come out here and make my belt loop. And you can do this in your own free time with nothing more than a jigsaw to cut your wood, and an X-Acto knife or a utility knife. $3.95, $4.95 at any big box store or at Walmart, and you can have a razor knife that will work this stuff just fine. So it's a great way to start out, and you will be amazed at just how pleasing it is to say you made these things yourself. When I made this one, I cut the shape out. I wet this top piece of leather, and I actually formed it with my fingers because I found a video that showed me how to do that, which is really funny if you look along the edges. Now, this was scrap leather, so there's a lot of marks on it, but you'll see a lot of fingernail prints, and the guy was saying, you need to use this part of your hand rather than this part, and I just didn't have the technique down, so I'm mashing it with my thumbnail like, well, gee, he was right. It does leave a mark. But be willing to do something ugly. Be willing to do something rudimentary. Be willing to do something that you go, gee, that didn't work. Throw it away. That's what is great to have a little scrap around. So here's the bald guy hoping that you will do something. And if you do something you're proud of, shoot me a picture. I'd like to see it too.